Disclaimer: it's inspired by reality, shaped by imagination.
What happens when the world's most brutally honest comedian goes head-to-head with one of television's sharpest political commentators? You get a clash so explosive, so unfiltered, that daytime TV may never recover. Ricky Gervais walked onto the View stage expecting to promote his new comedy special. But anyone who knows Ricky knows he doesn't just play by the rules, he burns the rule book. What began as playful banter quickly spiraled into a high-stakes confrontation when Sunny Hostin pressed him on whether comedians should be held accountable for harmful jokes. Sunny, known for her incisive questions and uncompromising views, wasn't about to let Ricky get away with his trademark "I'm just joking" defense. But Ricky wasn't about to back down either. What followed was a verbal showdown that had Whoopi Goldberg trying desperately to keep the peace, Joy Behar practically cheering from the sidelines, and the studio audience caught between laughter and shock. And just when it seemed like things might calm down, Ricky did the unthinkable. He stood up, ripped off his microphone, and stormed off the set, leaving behind stunned co-hosts, a buzzing audience, and a viral TV moment for the ages. Stay tuned, because this isn't just a story about a clash. It's about comedy, free speech, accountability, and what happens when no one is willing to blink first.
The studio lights blazed bright as the audience roared in applause. The View's theme song faded, and Whoopi Goldberg leaned into her camera-ready smile. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced warmly, "please welcome the one and only Ricky Gervais." The applause doubled, whistles echoing across the set. Ricky strode onto the stage with his signature swagger, dressed in his usual black t-shirt and jeans, a mischievous grin already plastered across his face. He gave a half-hearted wave before plopping into his seat, clearly enjoying the cheers. "Good to be here," he said, his British accent cutting through the studio hum. "Though I'm not entirely sure why you invited me. I'm probably the worst possible guest for this show." The audience laughed, and Joy Behar cackled louder than anyone. "Oh, don't worry," she quipped. "We can handle you." For the first few minutes, the conversation was lighthearted. Whoopi asked about Ricky's new comedy special, his take on aging, and whether he still enjoyed stirring up controversy. Ricky was in his element, tossing out sharp one-liners that left half the table doubled over and the other half grimacing. "I mean, comedy's easy now," Ricky teased at one point. "Everyone's offended by something. I could sneeze and that'd be an op-ed about how I disrespected mucus." The audience erupted. Sunny Hostin, however, hadn't laughed. She leaned forward, her expression measured, waiting for her moment. And then she took it. "Ricky," Sunny began, her voice calm but edged with steel, "you talk a lot about people being too sensitive, but do you ever stop to think about the people who feel harmed by the jokes you make? Do you think comedians have a responsibility, especially with the kind of platform you have, to avoid punching down?" The energy in the studio shifted almost instantly. The laughter died down, replaced with a curious murmur as the audience sensed the turn. Joy raised her eyebrows, already bracing for impact. Whoopi shot Sunny a quick glance as if to say, "Not yet," but it was too late. The spark had been lit. Ricky smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Ah, here we go," he said with relish. "The comedy police. I've been waiting for you." Sunny didn't flinch. "It's not about policing comedy. It's about accountability. Words matter. Jokes matter. They can shape how people think about groups of people. Don't you feel that responsibility?" The audience murmured again, half with agreement, half with anticipation. Ricky scratched his chin theatrically, as though Sunny had posed a riddle instead of a challenge. "Responsibility," he repeated. "My responsibility is to make people laugh. That's it. I'm not running for office. I'm not teaching kids in a classroom. I tell jokes, and people who don't like them, well, they don't have to listen." That earned a wave of applause from one side of the audience. Sunny, undeterred, pressed harder. But what about when your jokes reinforce stereotypes or target marginalized people who already face discrimination? Isn't that laughing at people instead of with them? Ricky chuckled. See, that's where you're wrong. I don't punch down. I punch everyone. It's called equality. Nobody's safe, not even me. That's the beauty of comedy. It's supposed to challenge, provoke, make you think. If you can't handle that, maybe don't come to a comedy show.
Joy clapped her hands dramatically. "Oh boy, this is gonna get good," she muttered, barely containing her grin. Whoopi interjected, trying to lighten the mood. "All right, let's not start World War III at the table. Ricky, Sunny's asking about the line. Where does the line go in comedy?" "The line," Ricky shot back quickly, "is wherever the audience laughs. That's it. If they don't laugh, I've failed. If they laugh, I've done my job. End of story." Sunny shook her head. "But that ignores the social consequences. It's not just about laughter. It's about what gets normalized, what gets excused. When someone like you tells a joke about, say, women or immigrants, it sends a message." "Oh, come on," Ricky interrupted, waving dismissively. "I tell jokes about everyone. Atheists, celebrities, rich people, myself. If people want to take it as some political manifesto, that's their problem, not mine." The tension was now undeniable, filling the studio like static electricity. The audience didn't know whether to laugh or stay silent, and the hosts exchanged glances that said, "This is gonna blow up fast." In just a few short minutes, the cheerful banter had transformed into a philosophical battlefield, and Ricky, with that sly grin on his face, looked like he was just getting warmed up. The studio air grew thicker, that invisible shift audiences could always feel when the pleasantries gave way to something raw. Ricky leaned back in his chair, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips, while Sunny leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes sharp as a scalpel. "So let's be clear," Sunny said, her voice steady but firm. "You're saying you don't care if your comedy perpetuates harmful ideas as long as people laugh?" The audience murmured again. Whoopi leaned back, watching closely. Joy Behar sat with her arms crossed, practically vibrating with anticipation. She lived for this sort of TV. Ricky shrugged. "Look, Sunny, if I cared about every single person who claimed to be offended by a joke, I'd never say anything. Comedy doesn't work if it's sanitized, scrubbed clean of anything risky. Do you know what you'd get? A knock-knock joke. And even then, someone would say it's discriminatory against doors." That earned a ripple of laughter from the crowd, but Sunny didn't bite. "That's a deflection," she countered. "We're not talking about knock-knock jokes. We're talking about when powerful voices, like yours, normalize cruelty under the guise of humor." "Oh, come on," Ricky interrupted, waving dismissively. "I tell jokes about everyone. Atheists, celebrities, rich people, myself. If people want to take it as some political manifesto, that's their problem, not mine." Sunny's jaw tightened. "Cruelty? No. Honesty, maybe. Satire? Absolutely. But cruelty? Come on. If you take offense at a joke, that's not about me. It's about you. It's about what you bring into it." "See, that's exactly the problem," she fired back. "You put the burden on the audience. But let's flip that. What if the joke is about immigrants and someone in that audience goes home feeling like their dignity was stripped away for someone else's cheap laugh? You don't think that matters?" The audience let out a collective "ooh." Ricky tilted his head, taking a beat before answering. "Do you honestly believe someone's dignity is so fragile it can be destroyed by a joke? That says more about how we treat people in society than about me telling a joke on stage. If the worst thing in someone's day is that a comedian made a crack, I'd say they're doing pretty well compared to actual injustices." Sunny's jaw tightened. "You're minimizing real pain, Ricky. People do carry those scars. Words can shape the way others see them. That's not abstract. That's real life." Joy chimed in, chuckling. "Sunny, if words could kill, Ricky would have been arrested years ago." The audience laughed, but Sunny didn't break. She pressed on. "Let me give you an example.
When you make jokes about women being oversensitive, that gives cover to men who already think women's voices don't matter. When you make jokes about immigrants, that reinforces the idea they're outsiders. You might think it's just a laugh, but those laughs echo. Ricky tapped his fingers on the table, his expression unreadable. Sunny, if comedy could move society that much, then comedians would be the most powerful people on earth. But we're not. We're clowns with microphones. The people who actually make life harder for women or immigrants aren't comedians. They're politicians, employers, lawmakers. Direct your anger there. I'm just holding up a mirror. The studio broke into applause at that line, but it was split. Some cheering Ricky's bravado, others nodding in agreement with Sunny's point. Sunny refused to let go. "So let me ask you this," she said, her voice rising slightly. "If someone told a joke about your family, say mocking your brother or your partner in a way that cut deep, would you still shrug it off and say it's just comedy? Or would you finally understand what it feels like?" The audience gasped audibly, leaning in. Ricky's smirk faltered just for a moment before he leaned forward, meeting Sunny's gaze directly. "If it's funny," Ricky said slowly, "I'd laugh. If it's not, I'd ignore it. That's the rule I live by. I don't need to censor the world to protect my feelings. That's my job, not yours, not anyone else's." The room erupted into competing sounds, applause, boos, murmurs. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sunny leaned back, her eyes flashing. "You say that now," she replied, "but there are millions of people who don't have the luxury of brushing it off. That's where you and I will never agree." Ricky raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I think we agree on more than you admit. You think people deserve respect. I do too. I just don't think respect means avoiding every possible joke that might make someone uncomfortable. Life is uncomfortable. Comedy is supposed to reflect that." The crowd roared, split evenly down the middle. Whoopi threw her hands up, exasperated, but smiling.
It was clear. The debate wasn't just heating up anymore. It was a bonfire, and both Ricky and Sunny were ready to toss more fuel on it. The laughter and clapping from Ricky's last remark still lingered, but it was like the sound was floating above a battlefield rather than softening it. Ricky leaned back, arms folded across his chest, clearly feeling he had landed a solid blow. Sunny, however, was sitting forward, her shoulders tight, her eyes locked on him like she wasn't done, not by a long shot. "See, Ricky," Sunny said, her voice quieter now, almost trembling with restrained emotion, "that's where you lose me. You keep treating this like an intellectual exercise. But for so many people, these aren't abstract debates. They're lived realities. You say it's all just comedy, but you've never been on the receiving end of being reduced to a punchline in a country that already makes you feel small." The audience fell into a hush. Joy raised her eyebrows, clearly intrigued that Sunny had shifted into a personal register. Ricky blinked once, his smirk gone, replaced with an expression that was equal parts curiosity and caution. Sunny drew a breath, steadying herself. "Let me tell you a story. When I was a kid, my mom worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. I was one of the only Afro-Latina kids in my school. And I'll never forget this. Sitting in the cafeteria, hearing boys parrot jokes they'd seen in some comedy routine, jokes about immigrants being freeloaders, jokes about women being hysterical, jokes about people who looked like me being less than. They weren't comedians, they were just kids. But those words, they cut like knives. And you know what the teachers did? Nothing. Because it was just jokes." Gasps rippled through the audience, and even Whoopi leaned in, nodding gently as Sunny spoke. "That's why this matters. Because when you stand on a stage with millions listening and dismiss it all as comedy, you're not just making people laugh. You're telling those kids it's okay. You're telling the world it's fine to laugh at the expense of someone else's dignity." The room fell into a hush, waiting for Ricky's reply. He shifted in his seat, exhaling slowly. For once, he didn't rush to fire back with a quip. Instead, he studied Sunny, his expression more measured than mocking. "That's awful. What those kids did to you, that's bullying. Plain and simple. But Sunny, you're wrong if you think that comes from comedy. Bullies will grab anything, a joke, a rumor, even silence, and use it to hurt someone. That's not on the comedian, that's on the bully." Sunny shook her head. "But don't you see? Comedy gives them the script. You may not mean it, but they weaponize it." Ricky leaned forward now, his voice firm, his usual smirk replaced with steel. "So what's the answer then? Ban anything that could be misused? Wrap the world in bubble wrap so no one ever gets hurt feelings? You know what happens then. Comedy dies, art dies, honesty dies. Because the truth is, life is offensive. It's messy, it's brutal, and it's unfair. And comedians, we're the ones who point at it and say, look, isn't this ridiculous? That's not cruelty, that's survival." The audience burst into applause, although it was tinged with unease. Some clapped loudly, others stayed still as though torn between Ricky's defiance and Sunny's raw testimony. Sunny's voice cut through the noise. "You call it survival. I call it punching down. And Ricky, the truth is, you don't know what it feels like to be the target of systemic cruelty, to be the person at the bottom, struggling to be heard. It's not survival when you're the one holding the microphone. It's privilege." That word, privilege, hung in the air like a bomb. The audience reacted audibly, some nodding, others groaning. Whoopi covered her mouth dramatically like she'd just witnessed a knockout punch. Ricky leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You think because I'm a white man, I've never struggled? You think I haven't been through hell? I've lost friends to addiction. I've been broke, mocked, and dismissed. I buried my parents. You think any of that hurt less because I'm standing here now making jokes? Pain doesn't check your race or gender before it shows up at your door." His voice cracked slightly on that last word, and the audience gasped, not at the sharpness this time, but at the crack of something real slipping through. Sunny softened for just a fraction of a second. "I'm not saying you haven't felt pain, Ricky. I'm saying your platform amplifies your voice in ways others will never get. That power comes with responsibility, whether you like it or not." The tension had reached a fever pitch. Ricky sat back, shaking his head, the smirk creeping back in as if he needed it to shield himself. "And I'm telling you, Sunny, the second comedians start thinking like politicians, calculating every word for optics, we stop being comedians. We stop telling the truth. And if that day comes, well, I'd rather quit than censor myself into irrelevance." The audience erupted, half cheering, half booing. The co-hosts exchanged nervous glances. Whoopi tried to calm the waters with her hands, but the fire was already raging. Sunny leaned in once more, eyes blazing. "Maybe the truth is bigger than your punchlines, Ricky. Maybe the truth is about healing, not laughing." The words sliced through the chaos, and the studio fell silent again. For a moment, it looked like Ricky might actually explode or break. His lips parted, his eyes narrowed, and the smirk disappeared entirely. The battle had shifted. This wasn't about comedy anymore. It was about who had the right to define truth and who got to decide how it should be delivered.
The tension from Sunny's last line, "Maybe the truth is about healing, not laughing," still hung in the air like smoke after a firework. The audience was restless, shifting in their seats, clapping sporadically as if unsure which side to endorse. The set, usually filled with easy banter and light applause, had turned into a powder keg. Ricky tapped his fingers against the table, then leaned forward, his voice steady but sharp enough to cut glass. "Healing? You want healing? That's not my job. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a politician. I'm a comedian. I tell the jokes that most people are too afraid to say out loud. If that makes people uncomfortable, good. Discomfort is where the truth lives." The audience let out a collective gasp, followed by pockets of applause. Joy Behar leaned forward,
her eyes glittering with amusement. "Oh, this is getting good," she muttered, loud enough for her mic to pick it up. Sunny didn't flinch. She fired back immediately. "But Ricky, when the discomfort only ever seems to fall on the same people, the marginalized, the already voiceless, that's not truth. That's cruelty dressed up as honesty. And whether you admit it or not, you profit off it." That landed like a hammer. The audience clapped loudly, some even standing, while Ricky's jaw visibly tightened. He laughed dryly, but it wasn't the easy chuckle from earlier. It was colder, angrier. "Profit?" Ricky snapped, his British accent cutting through the room like a blade. "I've worked for everything I've got. I started in tiny clubs, for free, with no guarantee anyone would ever laugh, let alone pay me. You'd think I sat there thinking, oh yes, let me build a career on cruelty. What nonsense." Sunny didn't blink. "Maybe you didn't think it, but that doesn't change the result. Words have consequences, Ricky. You don't get to decide how they land." The audience cheered again. Ricky pushed his chair back slightly, his arms crossed tightly against his chest. "You know what's funny?" he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Everyone wants comedians to have all the responsibility, but none of the freedom. You want us to carry the world's trauma on our backs while tap-dancing around everyone's feelings. You want us to be safe, but safe comedy isn't comedy, it's propaganda." The audience was mixed this time, louder from his supporters, but drowned by a wall of murmurs and disapproving claps from the other side. Whoopi raised her hands, her voice calm but urgent. All right, let's take a breath." But Ricky cut her off. "No, Whoopi, let's not take a breath, because this is exactly the problem with shows like this. It's not a conversation, it's an ambush. You don't actually want to hear what I think. You want to trap me into saying something you can use as a headline. Comedian Ricky Gervais offends millions on live TV." The audience roared with reaction, gasps, applause, even a few boos. Cameras zoomed in on Ricky's flushed face, the tension radiating off him. Sunny leaned in, her voice steady, almost calm. "No one's ambushing you. We're holding you accountable. And maybe that's what you can't stand." That was it, the spark that ignited the powder keg. Ricky slammed his palm against the table, the sound echoing through the studio. "Accountable? Accountable to who? To you? To Twitter? I've spent my life not caring what people like you think, because if I did, I'd never say a single bloody word. And if that's the world you want, a world where everyone whispers instead of speaks, count me out." The audience gasped loudly, then burst into chaotic noise. Half applause, half outrage. Joy covered her mouth in mock shock. Sarah's hands looked frozen, and even Whoopi's calm facade cracked into visible concern. Ricky ripped off his microphone and stood up. "You wanted your viral moment, Sunny. Congratulations, you've got it. But I'm not sticking around to be the villain in your little morality play." The studio was in pandemonium. Cheers, boos, claps, shouts. Ricky turned to the audience, his voice rising over the chaos. "Folks at home, remember this. Comedy doesn't owe you comfort. If you want comfort, watch a cooking show. If you want honesty, watch a comedian. That's all I've ever tried to be, honest." And with that, Ricky Gervais walked off the set, his back straight, his jaw set, leaving the co-host scrambling. Whoopi sighed heavily, trying to salvage the moment. Well, that was something. The audience laughed nervously, still buzzing from what they had witnessed. Sunny sat back, her face unreadable, though her hands were clenched tightly on the table. Joy leaned toward her and whispered into her mic, "Well, you definitely made daytime TV history." The audience clapped, some still standing, but the air in the studio was electric, charged, as if everyone knew they had just witnessed a moment that would ripple across social media within minutes.
The studio was still humming with noise long after Ricky Gervais had disappeared through the stage doors. The audience didn't know whether to clap, boo, or sit in stunned silence. Some cheered for Sunny Hostin's poise. Others shouted Ricky's name as though he'd just delivered a knockout in a prize fight. Whoopi, ever the professional, leaned forward with a weary smile. "Well, That escalated quickly, she said, her voice half joking but tinged with gravity. The audience laughed nervously, breaking some of the tension, but the unease lingered like a shadow over the table. Sunny adjusted her notes, but her face betrayed nothing. No smile, no gloating. "I stand by what I said," she remarked calmly. "Words matter. Accountability matters." Her voice was steady, but her hands, clasped together on the table, betrayed the adrenaline still coursing through her. Joy Behar leaned back with a smirk, shaking her head. "Oh, honey, that's daytime TV gold right there. You know Twitter's gonna be on fire for the next week." She wasn't wrong. Even as the cameras rolled to commercial, audience members were pulling out their phones, firing off tweets, clips, and hashtags. Hashtag Ricky vs. Sunny, hashtag comedy vs. accountability, and even hashtag walk-off-gate trended before the show had even ended. Back in the studio, the co-hosts did their best to smooth over the chaos. Sarah Haynes tried to redirect. "At the end of the day, I think this conversation shows how much people care about comedy, about responsibility, about the role of art in society." The audience clapped, grateful for the calmer tone, but it was clear the earlier explosion was all anyone would remember. By the time the segment ended, clips of Ricky slamming the table and walking off were already circulating online. One angle from an audience member's phone captured his parting words, "Comedy doesn't owe you comfort." That line became an instant rallying cry, repeated by comedians and free speech advocates across social platforms. But Sunny's words, "Maybe the truth is about healing, not laughing," took on a life of their own as well. Advocacy groups, journalists, and even a few fellow celebrities reposted the quote, praising her for standing firm in the face of Ricky's defiance. It was as if two very different truths had been set loose into the world, leaving viewers to choose their side. Entertainment outlets wasted no time. Headlines blared within hours. Ricky Gervais explodes on The View, storms off after clash with Sunny Hostin. Sunny Hostin versus Ricky Gervais, the debate over comedy and accountability. Daytime TV chaos. Gervais leaves the set in fiery showdown. Clips of the exchange dominated news cycles for days. Talk radio hosts debated it. Late-night comics joked about it. Even comedians like Chris Rock and Kathy Griffin weighed in on Twitter, some siding with Ricky's insistence on free expression, others applauding Sunny for demanding accountability. And through it all, the clip of Ricky ripping off his microphone and declaring, "If you want comfort, watch a cooking show," racked up millions of views. For the fans in the studio, it was a story they'd carry for life. The day Ricky Gervais turned The View into a battlefield and walked out without looking back. For Sunny, it was a moment that cemented her as more than just a host. She became a lightning rod for a conversation much bigger than one episode. As the dust settled, one truth remained. People weren't just entertained, they were forced to choose. Was comedy about truth at all costs, or did it owe something more? One thing was certain. This wasn't just a talk show spat. It was a cultural flashpoint. And the question lingered, long after the cameras cut and the lights dimmed.
Where should the line between laughter and responsibility really be drawn?